The official termination through the church where we had gotten married.
What we're about to unpack today isn't just surprising. It's the kind of statement that makes you pause and question everything you thought you understood about this situation. Cody Brown recently sat down for an interview with Access Hollywood in 2025, and what he said has completely shaken the fan base. According to him, he has reached a point in his life where he is simply too well known to experience real, genuine love. Let that sink in for a moment. This is the same man whose relationships have played out publicly for years, whose marriages slowly unraveled in front of millions, and who is now claiming that fame, not his actions, not his behavior, not his emotional history, is the reason he can't form authentic connections anymore. It almost feels like a complete rewrite of reality. Because when you look back at everything that has happened, the narrative doesn't point toward fame being the issue. It points toward a long pattern of emotional disconnect. Yet here he is, confidently reframing his story as if the problem exists entirely outside of him. He even went further, explaining that women have been reaching out to him, showing interest, but instead of seeing that as something normal, something human, he immediately questions their motives. In his mind, there's no possibility that someone could genuinely like him for who he is. It has to be about the cameras, the attention, the visibility. And that mindset reveals something deeper. It suggests that instead of being open to connection, he has already built a barrier, a narrative that protects him from having to confront a much more uncomfortable truth. Because if he accepts that these connections could be real, then he also has to accept the possibility that past relationships failed for reasons much closer to home. As the interview continued, things only became more revealing. Cody described the attention he's been receiving as something almost dangerous, using words like risky and threatening, as if he's navigating the life of a global celebrity constantly being pursued for the wrong reasons. But when you really break that down, it creates a strange contradiction. Because the version of fame he's describing doesn't quite match the reality people have seen. His recognition comes largely from Sister Wives, a show that didn't present a perfect love story. It documented the breakdown of multiple relationships over time. Viewers didn't just see the highlights. They saw the struggles, the emotional distance, the difficult conversations, and the moments where things clearly weren't working. So when someone expresses interest in him now, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening with full awareness of his past, his choices, and his behavior. And that makes his reaction even more puzzling. Instead of acknowledging that someone might see beyond those flaws, or even accept them, he shuts the door completely. He assumes the worst before anything even begins. It's almost like he's preemptively rejecting the idea of genuine connection so that he never has to risk being vulnerable. Because vulnerability would require honesty, not just with others, but with himself. It would mean asking difficult questions about why his previous relationships ended the way they did. It would mean considering the possibility that the issue isn't external at all. And that's a much harder reality to face. So instead, the narrative becomes simpler, safer, and far more convenient. It's not him, it's the fame. But what makes this entire situation even more layered is the way Cody presents himself in contrast to what viewers have actually witnessed over the years. In the same breath that he questions the authenticity of others, he describes himself as someone who is naturally vulnerable, someone who openly shares his emotions and lays his burdens out without hesitation. On the surface, that sounds like the kind of person who would be capable of deep, meaningful connection. But when you place that version of him next to the reality that unfolded on screen, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Because the man who now speaks about emotional openness is the same man who struggled, consistently, to provide even the most basic emotional reassurance to the women he was already committed to. This is the same individual who openly admitted that he was never truly attracted to Christine Brown, a statement that alone reshapes the entire foundation of their relationship. Imagine building a life with someone, raising children together, sharing decades of experiences, all while knowing that the person beside you never felt that initial spark, never felt that natural pull. That's not just a minor issue. That's something that affects every interaction, every moment, every expectation. And yet, despite that history, Cody now seems deeply concerned about whether future feelings directed toward him are genuine. It creates a contradiction that's hard to overlook. Because if authenticity is truly what matters to him now, then why didn't it hold the same weight in the relationships that came before? Why did vulnerability seem so limited when it was needed the most? These are the kinds of questions that naturally arise when someone's present narrative doesn't align with their past actions. And instead of those questions being addressed directly, they seem to be redirected, wrapped in a new explanation that places the responsibility somewhere else entirely. What makes Cody's statement even more difficult to take seriously is the timing, because while he's out here explaining why real love has become impossible for him, Christine Brown is living proof that it absolutely isn't. After walking away from a marriage that lasted nearly 3 decades, she didn't disappear into confusion or spend years questioning whether she was capable of being loved. Instead, she stepped into a completely different chapter of her life, one that looks almost unrecognizable compared to what viewers saw for years. Her relationship with David Woolley didn't come with hesitation, doubt, or suspicion. It came with ease, warmth, and something that had been missing for a very long time: mutual appreciation. And that's what makes this contrast so powerful. Because while Cody is building a narrative around why love can't be trusted, Christine is showing what it looks like when it's not questioned at all. She didn't need to overanalyze intentions or assume the worst. She paid attention to how she was treated, how she felt, and whether the connection was consistent, and that was enough. The difference in her energy is something fans have pointed out again and again. There's a lightness to her now, a sense of confidence that wasn't visible before. It's not just about being in a new relationship, it's about being in the right one. And that naturally raises an uncomfortable question for Cody's argument. If fame truly makes genuine connection impossible, then how did Christine manage to find it so quickly after leaving the exact same environment? She had the same level of public exposure, the same visibility, the same potential risks he's describing. And yet, none of those things stopped her from building something real. Which suggests that the obstacle he's talking about might not be as universal as he claims. In fact, it might not be the obstacle at all. To really understand why this contrast hits so hard, you have to look deeper into what Christine Brown revealed about her marriage, because it wasn't just a story of something that slowly fell apart over time. According to her, the foundation itself was never truly solid to begin with. From the very start, she was trying to build a life with someone who had already admitted, at least internally, that the connection wasn't what it should have been. And that kind of imbalance doesn't just disappear, it grows. It shapes the way you see yourself, the way you interpret every interaction, the way you measure your own worth. Christine described years of trying harder, giving more, and hoping that effort alone could create something that felt real. She adjusted her expectations, lowered her needs, and convinced herself that what she was experiencing was simply part of the lifestyle she had chosen. But deep down, there was always something missing, something fundamental that couldn't be forced into existence. And that's what makes Cody's current concerns about authenticity feel so disconnected. Because the real issue in that marriage wasn't whether feelings were genuine, it was that they weren't fully there to begin with. While Christine was investing emotionally, trying to build closeness and connection, Cody was operating from a place that lacked that same depth. And over time, that difference became impossible to ignore. So when he now questions whether new people could truly care about him, it almost flips the narrative in a way that doesn't match reality. The man who struggled to offer consistent emotional presence is now questioning the sincerity of others. It's a reversal that raises more questions than it answers. Because if genuine love is what he's worried about now, then the bigger question becomes, was it ever something he fully gave in the first place? When you step back and look at the full history, a clear pattern begins to take shape, one that goes far beyond a single interview or one controversial statement. Cody Brown has consistently framed the breakdown of his relationships in a way that shifts responsibility away from himself and onto others. When one marriage struggled, the explanation pointed toward the other person being too demanding or too emotional. When another connection became distant, the reasoning shifted again. Suddenly, it was about a lack of effort or a difference in priorities. And when Christine Brown made the decision to finally walk away after years of trying, even that was framed as her not being fully committed to the structure of the relationship. Now, with this new claim about fame making real love impossible, the pattern continues, just in a slightly different form. Instead of examining what might need to change internally, the focus moves outward to something that can't easily be challenged or measured. Fame becomes the explanation, the barrier, the reason things can't work. And on the surface, it almost sounds believable, because public attention can complicate personal life. But when you place that explanation next to everything that has already happened, it starts to feel less like a genuine obstacle and more like a convenient one. Because if the problem is external, then there's no need for self-reflection. There's no need to revisit past behavior, no need to question decisions, no need to acknowledge the role those choices may have played in the outcomes. It creates a narrative where everything makes sense without requiring any real change. And that's what makes it so powerful and at the same time so limiting. Because as long as the explanation stays external, the opportunity for growth stays just out of reach. The irony here is impossible to ignore. While Cody Brown sits in interviews warning the world that fame has destroyed his chances at authentic love, the very person he left behind, Christine Brown, is living proof to the contrary. Her life after leaving Cody is a masterclass in what happens when someone finally chooses themselves over excuses, manipulation, and blame. Within months of stepping away, she met David Woolley, a man completely disconnected from reality television, who wanted her for who she genuinely is, not because of her past, her fame, or her connection to a controversial show. There was no pretense, no camera-ready performance, no social media calculus, just two people seeing each other clearly, valuing each other authentically. Every contrast between the two lives is stark. Cody, worried about women approaching him, treating any interest as potentially motivated by shallow or external reasons. Christine, embraced by someone who actively chooses her, celebrates her, and treats her as the priority he always should have been in her life. The timing could not be more telling. While Cody is projecting insecurities and externalizing responsibility, Christine's social media, interviews, and public presence radiate confidence, joy, and fulfillment. The transformation is undeniable. She is thriving emotionally, socially, and romantically, while the man who claims fame is a barrier to connection still cannot confront the role he has played in the collapse of multiple marriages. This contrast is more than just public perception. It is a lived demonstration of cause and effect. Christine's newfound happiness underscores the truth that Cody's reasoning isn't about reality, but about avoidance. By blaming fame, he protects himself from the difficult work of vulnerability, self-reflection, and accountability. He maintains a shield against the discomfort of confronting why his relationships failed, ignoring the emotional harm his choices caused. Meanwhile, Christine's life is a beacon for anyone who has been subjected to emotional neglect and manipulation, showing that real love is possible once you remove yourself from toxic circumstances. Her story exemplifies the difference between obstacles imposed by external circumstances and those created by someone's own behavior. In short, Cody's too famous excuse crumbles when faced with Christine's reality. Her joy and authentic partnership with David Woolley are irrefutable evidence that love was never impossible. It was merely impossible with him. It's a narrative twist that feels almost poetic. The woman who is undervalued, manipulated, and dismissed finds fulfillment, while the man who caused the pain continues to invent external reasons for his failures. This is more than irony. It's an illustration of how accountability, or the lack of it, shapes life outcomes. Christine's success isn't just personal. It's symbolic, showing how stepping away from someone unwilling or incapable of real connection can open doors to genuine love, happiness, and self-respect. It highlights the stark contrast between constructing excuses and embracing reality. Cody's interview is not just delusional, it's a defensive mechanism, and Christine's life is the living contradiction to his narrative. What makes this situation so compelling is how it exposes the psychological patterns behind Cody Brown's reasoning. His repeated claims that fame prevents authentic love are a textbook example of avoidance and blame-shifting, designed to deflect attention away from his own failures and emotional unavailability. By framing himself as the victim of circumstances beyond his control, Cody avoids confronting the decades of neglect, favoritism, and emotional abandonment that characterized his marriages. Each wife who left him, Mary, Janelle, Christine, represents a distinct chapter of unmet needs, unanswered questions, and unresolved hurt, yet he consistently reframes these experiences as the fault of others rather than the result of his actions. Christine's current life with David Woolley exposes the absurdity of this narrative. She did not need to engage in lengthy therapy, reinvent herself, or overcome extraordinary obstacles to find authentic connection. Instead, she simply removed herself from a man who consistently failed to provide love, attention, or emotional safety. Her rapid transition from a 27-year marriage marked by neglect and emotional abuse to a partnership filled with mutual respect, laughter, and genuine care illuminates a central truth. The problem was never her ability to love or her worthiness, but Cody's incapacity to reciprocate it. This contrast is amplified by the public nature of their histories. Cody's fame comes from a reality TV show that broadcasted his failures, favoritism, and emotional manipulation for over a decade. If his fame problem were legitimate, then anyone paying attention would recognize that Christine, being arguably even more public, should have faced the same challenges in finding love. Yet she did not. She found someone willing to see past the notoriety, the television persona, and the social scrutiny, and love her for exactly who she is. This reality highlights how Cody's justification is not a genuine obstacle. It is a protective narrative to avoid vulnerability, reflection, and accountability. Furthermore, it exposes the emotional consequences for women subjected to this kind of manipulation. Christine spent years questioning her own feelings, her worthiness, and the legitimacy of her desires because Cody's behavior consistently undermined her confidence. She was taught to accept scraps of affection, to compete for attention, and to feel guilty for wanting love that should have been freely given. The cognitive dissonance created by living in that environment, being told your needs are excessive while being denied authentic connection, can take decades to unravel. Christine's transformation, therefore, is not just romantic, it is deeply psychological. It demonstrates the profound liberation that occurs when someone stops internalizing blame for another's failures and begins to reclaim agency over their own happiness. Every social media post, every interview, and every public display of joy is both personal healing and symbolic defiance against the patterns that Cody exemplifies. In essence, Christine's life is a masterclass in rejecting excuses, setting boundaries, and seeking partnerships grounded in respect, mutuality, and emotional availability. Cody's fame excuse, once a shield, is rendered meaningless against the tangible, living proof of Christine's authentic and thriving life. The ripple effect of Cody's fame excuse goes beyond just his own delusions. It serves as a cautionary tale about the ways people rationalize failure in relationships. By asserting that he is somehow too well known for authentic love, Cody Brown creates a self-imposed barrier that absolves him of responsibility while simultaneously reinforcing a false narrative of victimhood. This excuse is particularly striking when juxtaposed against the trajectory of Christine Brown's life after leaving him. Christine's rapid emotional recovery, her flourishing relationship with David Woolley, and her glowing presence on social media collectively dismantle the notion that fame is a legitimate obstacle to love. She met David through ordinary, real-world circumstances, outside the influence of television cameras, celebrity networks, or fan-driven attention. The connection she formed was genuine, rooted in mutual respect, attraction, and emotional availability, not manufactured drama or fame-induced intrigue. This sharp contrast illuminates the underlying truth. Cody's barriers were never external, they were entirely self-created. Moreover, the public response underscores the absurdity of his claims. Fans, commentators, and social media users quickly recognize the irony. On platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, Viewers dissected side-by-side evidence of Cody's reality TV failures versus Christine's authentic happiness. Screenshots, memes, reaction videos, and comparative posts circulated widely, highlighting not just the comedic disconnect of Cody's statements, but also the psychological mechanics of excuse-making. Observers pointed out that if fame were truly an impediment, Christine would have encountered the same fame problem, yet her success in finding real love demonstrates the opposite: emotional availability, genuine self-worth, and personal clarity matter far more than a minor reality TV profile. Additionally, this narrative reinforces critical lessons about relationship dynamics and personal accountability. Cody's pattern, blaming women for his failed marriages, projecting external causes onto circumstances beyond his control, and portraying himself as a perpetual victim, is an instructive example of how emotional manipulation can be cloaked in seemingly rational explanations. By framing women's interest as potentially insincere or dangerous, he deflects any need to examine his own behavior or growth, creating a protective shield against vulnerability. Christine's journey, however, exemplifies the opposite approach. She reclaimed agency over her own happiness, discerned authentic affection, and engaged with partners capable of reciprocating love without deflection or blame. The stark juxtaposition between Cody's self-imposed limitations and Christine's realized potential emphasizes the consequences of choosing excuses over self-reflection. It also serves as a broader lesson for audiences. External factors like fame, status, or social perception do not inherently obstruct the possibility of connection. Individual accountability, emotional availability, and willingness to engage meaningfully with others do. Christine's post-Cody life embodies this principle. She found love, stability, and joy by stepping away from a man who consistently failed to meet her needs, refusing to internalize his blame-shifting tactics, and trusting her own ability to recognize genuine connection. Cody's continuing insistence that fame prevents authentic love now reads less as a cautionary claim and more as an artifact of avoidance, a psychological defense mechanism shielding him from the hard truths of his own failures. This narrative is as revealing about Cody's mindset as it is instructive for audiences. It shows how one person's refusal to confront personal shortcomings can contrast so dramatically with another's ability to rebuild, thrive, and model what real, mutual love looks like. The aftermath of Cody's repeated excuse-making has far-reaching consequences, not just for him, but for the entire Sister Wives narrative and fan community. Fans who once empathized with Cody's struggles are now faced with a jarring disconnect between his words and observable reality. The contrast between Cody's claims that fame obstructs love and the tangible evidence of Christine Brown's happiness with David Woolley is stark, prompting many viewers to reassess their understanding of Cody's character. Social media discourse exploded as clips, interviews, and fan-edited compilations illustrated the pattern of excuse-making versus accountability. Memes mocking Cody's fame excuse became viral, emphasizing the absurdity of blaming external circumstances while consistently failing to foster meaningful, sustained relationships. Psychologically, this pattern reveals a defensive mechanism that shields Cody from confronting uncomfortable truths, that his behavior, choices, and emotional limitations, not the glare of cameras, created repeated relational failures. At the same time, Christine's post-Cody trajectory provides a masterclass in resilience and self-determination. By refusing to internalize blame, actively pursuing her own growth, and seeking partners who match her values and emotional availability, she demonstrates that agency and introspection are far more determinative in achieving fulfilling relationships than any external factor like fame. The public nature of these events adds another layer of complexity. Reality TV fame magnifies private decisions into public discourse, turning personal failures into a collective lesson for audiences. Cody's claim that fame prevents authentic love is undermined by the observable success of his former spouses, who navigate both personal growth and public scrutiny without falling victim to excuses. The cultural implications extend beyond the Browns themselves. Viewers witness firsthand how accountability, or lack thereof, shapes perception and legacy. Cody's repeated rationalizations risk permanently framing him as someone unwilling or unable to engage in the self-reflection necessary for relational success. Conversely, Christine's ability to build a life marked by genuine connection underlines the value of integrity, honesty, and personal responsibility. Moreover, the dynamics between Cody and other family members, including Robin Brown, are influenced by this ongoing narrative of avoidance. Her alignment with him, whether out of loyalty, strategy, or personal attachment, further complicates public perception and highlights how relational ecosystems in high-profile families can amplify patterns of blame and deflection. Fans and commentators alike dissect every interaction, court hearing, and social media post, constructing a cumulative understanding of behavior, motives, and consequences. In essence, the saga surrounding Cody's fame excuse functions as both entertainment and a cautionary tale, illustrating the dangers of externalizing blame and refusing accountability. While Cody's narrative remains mired in rationalizations, Christine's story progresses with clarity, purpose, and emotional authenticity. For audiences, the lesson is clear. External conditions like fame or scrutiny may present challenges, but they are never insurmountable barriers to love. What truly determines relational success is the willingness to engage honestly, confront personal shortcomings, and embrace authentic connection. In this light, Cody's insistence that fame blocks love reads less as a legitimate obstacle and more as a defining example of the consequences of evasion, demonstrating that failure to own one's actions inevitably contrasts with the success of those who do.